This is Echoes of History, where the past still speaks.
There's a question that seems simple on the surface, yet is incredibly difficult to answer. Why has the role of women in ancient history nearly vanished from textbooks, museums, and even our collective memory? The women who once governed land, led ceremonies, and guided communities are now mentioned only as shadows behind kings, princes, or military heroes. Is it because they never existed, or because their stories were rewritten or written over by those who rose to power under a new order? When archaeology gained momentum in the 19th century, most of those interpreting the data were Western men, shaped by patriarchal societies, male-dominated religions, and colonial worldviews. In their eyes, anything that didn't fit the male ruler, female subordinate mold was dismissed, reinterpreted, or seen as an anomaly. Ancient goddess figures were labeled fertility charms. Female-centered graves were treated as coincidences. Communities without walls or armies were seen as primitive, undeveloped. One striking example, at the Çatalhöyük site in modern-day Turkey, dating back nearly 9,000 years, archaeologists discovered hundreds of female figurines. These statues had full-bodied forms commanding postures and calm, dignified faces. Many were found in ceremonial spaces, accompanied by rare animal bones and fine pottery. Yet for years after their discovery, these artifacts were vaguely labeled fertility symbols, and few asked the obvious questions. Why were all of them female? Why weren't there male equivalents? It wasn't until the late 20th century, when female scholars and non-traditional researchers began re-examining the evidence, that a bold possibility emerged. Çatalhöyük wasn't just a society that honored goddesses. It may have been a matriarchal community where women weren't secondary, but the very center of life itself. But if that's true, then the entire model of linear human evolution we've been taught in schools begins to unravel. Mainstream history tells us that society moved from primitive tribes, chieftains, monarchies, empires, as if this sequence marked inevitable progress. But if the earliest societies operated through communal living, peace, matriarchy, and feminine spirituality, then we must confront an uncomfortable truth. Progress does not always mean fairness. In fact, it may represent a regression, at least in terms of human dignity. One of the key forces that erased women's central role was the rise of monotheistic religion. As new faiths emerged, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, nearly all defined the supreme deity as male and tied spiritual authority to patriarchal structures. Goddesses were either replaced, downgraded to wives or mothers, or vilified as witches or demons. The biblical story of Eve, the first woman, blamed for original sin and humanity's exile from paradise, is a prime example of how culture was rewritten to weaken the feminine archetype. And it didn't stop at scripture. In architecture and ritual too, women were gradually pushed out of sacred spaces. Those who once served as priestesses, healers, and spiritual guides became exceptions, or were removed entirely from formal religious roles. In their place came men in robes, holding scepters, speaking divine words, while women knelt in silence behind them. This transformation didn't happen overnight, it took centuries, but its consequences ran deep. When history is written by men in patriarchal societies, they don't always lie intentionally. They simply don't see what once existed outside the world they know. And so the women who once held leadership roles, the goddesses who once symbolized power, and the communities built on maternal lineage became forgotten fragments, unnamed, unwritten, and left out of stone carvings and historical records. Even today, it's only thanks to independent archaeologists and brave new voices that we're beginning to ask the deeper question: what if the history we know is only one part of the picture, and the rest was rewritten to fit a new order? We've all heard about ancient goddess figures, but at Çatalhöyük, it's not just imagery. What we witness is a real society where women held power not through armed might or monumental temples, but through the structure of daily life, built on connection, care, and spiritual meaning. There were no city gates, no kings, no watchtowers, guards, or towering temples on a hill. Instead, there were hundreds of homes clustered tightly together like a honeycomb, without walls or fences. At the heart of each home burned a small, steady fire, warming not just the body, but the soul. This wasn't an empire, it was a community, one that history forgot to name properly. In the late 20th century, on the plains of Konya in central Turkey, archaeologists uncovered one of the most extraordinary Neolithic sites ever found, the settlement known as Çatalhöyük. Dated between 7,500 and 5,700 BCE, this vast town may have been home to over 8,000 people, an astonishing number for that era. But what made Çatalhöyük truly remarkable and deeply puzzling to mainstream academia wasn't its age or its size. It was how its society operated in a way completely unlike what we've been taught about early human civilization. There were no palaces, no royal tombs, no defensive walls or signs of warfare, no clear evidence of a ruling elite. Instead, there were hundreds of nearly identical houses built wall to wall with no streets. People moved across rooftops, entering homes through openings in the ceilings. There were no fences to mark boundaries. The homes were of equal size with similar interiors. There was no superior architecture to signify social status. This wasn't a society of hierarchy. It was a tightly connected network. And at the center of that network, women. In many of the homes, archaeologists discovered clay figurines of women depicted in powerful poses, seated on thrones flanked by lions with prominent bellies. These weren't just fertility images, they radiated authority and abundance. One of the most famous, often called the seated birth goddess, shows a woman giving birth. Yet her posture and gaze are not of pain, but of command, like a ruler bestowing life. These figurines weren't tossed aside or hidden. They were carefully buried beneath the floors, placed with reverence in ritual corners, surrounded by ancestral remains and finely crafted objects. Some archaeologists now believe these weren't mere lucky charms, as once thought, but representations of a goddess figure symbolizing fertility, protection, and the spiritual heart of the community. The burial structures of Çatalhöyük add to this picture. The dead were buried beneath the floors of the homes, usually in a curled fetal position, accompanied by rich grave goods. In many cases, women were buried with more offerings than men, suggesting they held significant spiritual or household leadership roles. Unlike later societies where power was separated from everyday life, concentrated in palaces, temples, and noble classes, Çatalhöyük tied ritual, ancestry, and sacred memory directly into the family home. Every house was a small temple, and at its center may have been the mother. Of course, not all scholars agree. Some archaeologists caution that we don't yet have definitive proof to declare Çatalhöyük a matriarchal society. But there's one point that few dispute. Women were not secondary figures here. They were everywhere, in the architecture, the rituals, the art, and in the very way the community was built. And that in itself challenges the old model of human history, the linear tale that begins with men hunting and ends with men ruling. Because if a city-sized settlement could thrive for thousands of years, with no signs of war, no kings, no rigid hierarchy, then we must ask, is the patriarchal, monarchic, and stratified society we call civilization truly the pinnacle of human development, or just one of many paths we could have taken? Çatalhöyük is a crucial clue in the larger puzzle of forgotten matriarchal civilizations. But it's only the beginning, because if one Çatalhöyük existed, then dozens, maybe hundreds, of similar communities may once have flourished, only to be buried beneath the soil, swallowed by rising seas, or worse, erased from memory. Leaving behind the land of honeycomb rooftops, we now cross the sea to another civilization, one where beauty, peace, and feminine power were woven into every mural and the rhythms of daily life. This was the island of Crete, where the once glorious Minoan civilization flourished. Here, goddesses adorned the palace walls. Centuries passed without the shadow of war, and women weren't just present. They ruled, created, traded, and shaped the very essence of culture. Located on what is now the Greek island of Crete, the Minoan civilization, named after the mythical King Minos of Greek legend, was one of the most advanced societies in ancient Europe. And yet it is also one of the most misunderstood, or perhaps intentionally misrepresented. When archaeologists began excavating the palace of Knossos in the early 20th century, they discovered something unusual. There were no fortresses, no city walls, no signs of standing armies or warfare. Instead, they found walls covered in paintings of elaborately dressed women, joyful dance festivals, and religious ceremonies centered around a female deity holding serpents. Unlike neighboring civilizations like Egypt or Mesopotamia, which revolved around divine kings and military conquest, the Minoans left behind little evidence of male-dominated power. Across hundreds of frescoes and pottery pieces, women appear more frequently than men, and not just passively, but leading rituals, dancing, and often placed at the center of the scene. One of the most iconic symbols is the snake goddess, a famous terracotta figure depicting a bare-chested woman holding two serpents with a powerful, commanding gaze. Many scholars believe this image represents a woman who presides over both birth and death, a divine force that governs the balance of the universe. Another striking detail The so-called palaces of Knossos, Phaistos, and Zakros were nothing like Western royal courts. They were not residences for kings issuing commands. Rather, they were complex hubs, with ceremonial rooms, food storage areas, communal gathering spaces, and open-air courtyards. Today, many researchers believe these palaces were more like religious and social centers, not symbols of a singular ruler's power. Moreover, Minoan wealth came not from war, but from trade. Archaeological evidence shows a thriving exchange with Egypt, the Levant, and mainland Greece, trading pottery, olive oil, and art for gold, ivory, and precious woods. Even Egyptian records from the New Kingdom period refer to the people of Keftiu, believed to be Minoans, not as invaders, but as cultured merchants, well-dressed, offering gifts, and bearing no weapons. All of this leads many modern scholars to believe that the Minoans built a complex matriarchal society and where women held influence in ritual, economics, and art, and very likely played a central role in shaping the social order itself. However, when Arthur Evans, the man who excavated Knossos, chose to name this culture Minoan after the legendary king Minos, he may have unintentionally or deliberately projected the concept of kingship onto a civilization that may have had no kings at all. And by interpreting it through the lens of male-dominated monarchies, many of its details were distorted to fit a model it never belonged to. This raises an important question. Why has such a peaceful, prosperous, and possibly matriarchal civilization been forgotten, while violent empires like Assyria or Rome are celebrated as icons of civilization? The answer may lie in this. Minoan society didn't fit the historical lesson that powerful institutions wanted to teach, that order only comes through discipline, war, and male authority. A gentle civilization led by women, thriving without armies or conquest, if widely acknowledged, could shake the foundations of everything the dominant version of history is built upon. And perhaps that's why Minoan Crete, a brilliant light in the ancient Mediterranean, was pushed into the shadows of history. Leaving behind the gentle shores of the Mediterranean, we now ride into the sweeping winds of the Central Asian steppes, where myth and truth blur together, and where women didn't sit on thrones but rode horseback, drew bows, and struck fear into even the most hardened Greek historians. They were known by a name that inspired both awe and bias, the Amazons. These were not queens or priestesses, but warriors racing through the wind on horseback, shooting arrows with divine precision, rejecting marriage, and according to Greek legend, even removing one breast to better wield a bow. To the ancient Greeks, they were more than enemies. They were a threat to the rising male order, a challenge to everything the patriarchal world sought to enforce. But what if this wasn't just myth? What if the Amazons were real, not as distorted monsters shaped by fear and cultural bias, but as living symbols of a society where women held power, a society erased, misrepresented, and buried beneath the histories written by victors? Today, the name Amazon might evoke images of mythical warrior women battling heroes like Hercules or Achilles, fierce, untamed, and above all, unforgivable in the Greek world for one reason: they didn't need men to survive. In ancient tales, the Amazons lived at the edge of the world, beyond the reach of patriarchal rule. For centuries, historians dismissed them as fantasy, figments of a male-dominated society crafted to warn against the dangerous woman, a cautionary tale of what might happen if women gained too much power. But by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, everything began to change. Not through stories or speculation, but through ancient bones. Across the steppes of Scythia, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and southern Russia, archaeologists uncovered burial sites filled with weapons. When DNA analysis was performed, the results stunned researchers. Many of the warriors buried with bows, spears, and armor were women. One of the most revealing discoveries was made at the Pokrovka burial site near the Kazakhstan-Russia border, where archaeologist Jeanine Davis Kimball and her team unearthed graves containing women buried with spears, archery gear, and even light armor. Their skeletons bore the marks of horseback riding, combat injuries, and honored burial rites, just like male warriors. Davis Kimball called them real-life Amazons, not in the mythical sense, but as solid evidence that some ancient societies allowed, or even relied on, women as key fighters. This leads to a compelling theory. Perhaps the Greeks had indeed encountered, or at least heard tales of, such societies, but due to the cultural gulf, they interpreted them through the only lens they knew. In Greek eyes, a woman who didn't tend the home, raise children, or submit to male authority, but instead rode into battle, chose her own lovers, or rejected men altogether, was unnatural. And so these women were mythologized, twisted into monsters, painted as savage and ruthless, the polar opposite of the ideal wife in Greek city-states. But if we strip away the bias, a different picture emerges. The Amazons, or more accurately, the female warriors of ancient Central Asia, were part of a nomadic culture in which women held equal standing. They contributed to the economy, fought in wars, and played roles in spiritual life. This wasn't a society trying to overthrow men. It was simply a different model, one where gender didn't dictate destiny. Interestingly, even in Greek legends, the Amazons never go down easily. Though always defeated by male heroes, they are portrayed as worthy opponents, courageous, formidable, and unyielding. Perhaps this was the last whisper of a truth the Greeks couldn't quite erase, that somewhere they had witnessed or heard tales of a world where women didn't wait for men to rescue them. And just like the Minoans and the women of Scythia and other forgotten matriarchal cultures, the story of the Amazons doesn't live in mainstream textbooks. It survives only in myth, on the margins, and beneath the earth. Leaving behind the windswept steppes and the fierce image of the warrior woman, we now descend into a deeper layer of human culture, where the goddess no longer carries a bow or wears armor, but is embodied through symbols of fertility, the earth, and the vast cosmos. From the dark prehistoric caves of Europe to the fertile Ganges Valley, from ancient Mesopotamia to the distant mountain ranges of East Asia, we encounter a familiar figure, the Great Mother Goddess. She existed long before the rise of male-dominated religions, Before the Almighty God, before Zeus hurled his lightning, before male gods claimed the heavens and the holy seats of power. Humanity once bowed before a very different deity, not a warrior god, but a mother, full, nurturing, regenerative, embodying both life and death, the mother goddess, once ruler of the universe and then erased from it, like a fading echo buried beneath layers of time. Over the past century, as archaeologists excavated prehistoric sites around the world, from Europe and the Middle East to India and Southeast Asia, they repeatedly found something strange. Small figurines depicting the female form, often with large hips and breasts, small arms, and little to no facial detail. And most striking of all, they predate any known male deity representations. One of the most famous examples is the Venus of Willendorf, unearthed in Austria and dated to nearly 25,000 years ago. The figurine stands barely 4.5 inches tall, yet features pronounced breasts, hips, and belly, with no clothing, no weapons. Early scholars dismissed her as a fertility symbol, a convenient simplification. But when we place her alongside dozens of similar Venuses from France, Germany, Russia, Ukraine, and Anatolia, a pattern emerges. This isn't just the image of a woman, it's a sacred icon, a widespread primordial goddess figure, a divine presence found across continents. And it wasn't limited to Europe. In Turkey, the goddess statues from Çatalhöyük show similar forms, but more developed, enthroned, flanked by sacred animals. In the Indus Valley, modern India, carvings depict a crowned female surrounded by trees and animals, a vivid symbol of ecology and fertility. In Mesopotamia, before male gods like Marduk took the throne, people worshipped Inanna, a goddess of love, war, and the heavens, with her own fierce agency. In Egypt, Isis was not merely Horus's mother, she was the supreme force of rebirth and magic. In Greece, before Zeus, there was Gaia, the earth goddess, mother of all life, even of the gods themselves. These goddesses, spanning thousands of years, share common traits. They are tied to the land, the moon, the seasons, fertility, and the rhythms of the universe. To ancient peoples, the cracked soil that birthed crops mirrored the pregnant body. Fertility wasn't just a metaphor, it was divine. But gradually, these goddesses were diminished. Inanna became the consort of male deities. Isis was reduced to the role of nurturing mother. Gaia faded into the background, the ground beneath the feet of newer gods. And the Great Mother, once the embodiment of the cosmos, now survives only in ancient texts, fragmented mythologies, and museum displays. Why? Because as society shifted toward patriarchy and monarchies, symbols of power had to be redesigned. A world ruled by men couldn't comfortably worship a supreme female deity. It was too dangerous, too disruptive. So male gods were created or elevated. Female deities, if allowed to remain, were reshaped into passive roles as mothers, wives, or poetic muses, never as the decision-makers. This happened not as a single conspiracy, but as a global shift, a long restructuring of collective consciousness that took place over generations. And the result? The entire history of religion, the sacred and the role of women, B was rewritten to serve a new social order. Today, when we stand in a museum and glance at a nameless figurine labeled Venus or Stone Age fertility idol, we often move on without realizing we're standing before a relic of a lost sacred world, a world where the mother was once revered as God. And so we must ask, did those ancient worlds truly vanish, or were they simply buried beneath new stories, new gods, and a history retold in a different voice? If you were ever taught that political power has always belonged to men, it's time to take a closer look at ancient Africa, a land where power once had a different shape. A feminine one, steady, commanding, and fully sovereign. Not a queen behind the throne, but a woman sitting firmly upon it. Not legend, but reality. A reality that once existed and was later forgotten. Africa is the cradle of humankind, and perhaps the first place where sacred femininity and political authority were deeply intertwined. While much of the continent's history has been filtered through colonial narratives or lost to oral traditions, archaeology and enduring cultural practices still leave clear traces. Matriarchy once played a central role in many ancient African societies. One of the most remarkable examples is the Kingdom of Kush, located just south of ancient Egypt, in what is now Sudan, also known historically as Nubia. Unlike the male-dominated dynasties of Egypt, where pharaohs ruled supreme, Kush had true queens, rulers in their own right, known as Kandake, often rendered as Candace. According to Greek and Roman sources, the Kandake were not figureheads, they were sovereigns, leading armies, negotiating treaties, and making state decisions. One legendary Kandake is said to have confronted Alexander the Great. Another, Kandake Amanirenas, famously led Kushite forces against Roman invaders in the 1st century BCE, captured a statue of Emperor Augustus, and buried its head beneath a temple staircase as a bold statement of triumph. What's more, the structure of Kushite society didn't simply allow for a female king. It reflected a matrilineal system of inheritance. Evidence suggests that royal succession passed not to a king's son, but to the son of his sister. This wasn't symbolic matriarchy, it was a clear political structure based on maternal lineage. Further west, among the Mande peoples, in regions that are now Mali, Guinea, and Senegal, matrilineal traditions quietly persisted for centuries. In these societies, family names, land rights, inheritance, and social rank passed through the mother's line. The eldest woman in a family often held decision-making authority over marriage arrangements, land use, and ancestral rituals. In many communities, even when men served as the public representatives, the household itself functioned along matriarchal lines. The mothers and maternal aunts didn't stand in village courts, they sat at the heart of the home, and their word was often final. Crucially, these matriarchal systems were not weak or chaotic, as some Western theorists once claimed. On the contrary, they fostered resilient communities, balancing livelihood, culture, and spiritual practice, with women as the vital thread connecting generations. But when Islamic influence spread across Africa, followed by European colonial rule, these matriarchal systems began to erode. They were dismissed as backward, disorderly, or incompatible with civilized progress. The roles once held by women were gradually replaced with patriarchal bureaucracies modeled after European governance, emphasizing male succession and centralized authority. Once again, the central role of women was displaced, not by immediate violence, but through a slow rewriting of history, reshaping of societal norms, and restructuring of institutional memory. Today, if you ask someone to name the great rulers of ancient Africa, you'll likely hear Mansa Musa, Shaka Zulu, or the pharaohs of Egypt. But how many know the name Kandake Amanirenas, or the elder matriarchs of the Mande, who kept their societies stable for generations? Their stories didn't vanish. They were simply not told, or told in a different voice. From the continent of Africa, we now turn our steps towards Southeast Asia, a region that not only preserves matrilineal traditions to this very day, but also once witnessed the rise of kingdoms ruled directly and legitimately by women. From the vibrant coastal kingdom of Champa to the highland tribes of the interior, women's power was not hidden in the shadows. It shone brightly at the heart of politics, ritual, and communal life. In the global narrative of history, Southeast Asia is often pushed to the margins, seen as distant, mysterious, even peripheral. But when we look closely at local traditions, native legends, and humble yet clear archaeological evidence, a striking truth emerges. Women in this region have never been absent from the corridors of power. One of the most compelling examples is the ancient kingdom of Champa, which thrived along what is now the central coast of Vietnam from the 2nd to the 17th century. In ancient Cham inscriptions, especially at the Po Nagar Towers in Nha Trang, people worshipped the goddess Po Ina Nagar. She was not revered as a subordinate deity, but as the creator of the earth, trees, rice, and humanity itself. This placed her not below, but arguably above the male deities imported later through Hinduism. Her image stood at the center of grand temple towers. Lavish offerings were made not to a gentle mother in the home, but to a supreme spiritual queen. Many scholars believe this devotion reflected a society with clear matrilineal elements, where power and inheritance may have passed through the female line. And it wasn't just the Cham. Among the highland ethnic groups of Vietnam's Central Highlands, such as the Aj, Manong, and Drai, traditional matrilineal systems still shape life today. Here, the youngest daughter inherits the family's property and home. When a man marries, he moves into his wife's household. Within the family, it is often the grandmother or mother who coordinates everything, from major decisions like marriage to ancestral rites and rituals. Unlike patriarchal models where the man is head of the household, in these communities, the eldest woman is often the keeper of the ancestral hearth, the spiritual and practical leader of the family. She conducts ceremonies, manages marriages, and oversees the distribution of assets after death. What's fascinating is that this matriarchal structure has not resulted in instability, as some patriarchal theories might suggest. On the contrary, it has fostered resilient intergenerational communities bound together through the maternal line. From grandmother to granddaughter, women form the thread of continuity, while men, though not central, still play important roles in guidance and support. Even in larger ancient kingdoms such as Funan, which once occupied areas of modern-day southern Vietnam and Cambodia, Chinese historical records note that the founder of the kingdom was a woman named Liu Diu, who is said to have defeated the Indian merchant Kaundinya and taken control. Though later legends shifted power narratives toward patriarchy, traces of that matriarchal origin still remain. In modern Indonesia, the Minangkabau of Sumatra maintain one of the strongest matrilineal societies in the world, with over 4 million people. Clan names, property, and homes are passed from mother to daughter, while men are respected in advisory and religious roles. This is not an anomaly, but a living system that has endured for generations. All of these examples are not exceptions. They are evidence that for thousands of years, Southeast Asia has been a region where women held not only culture, but power. Not through domination, but through balance. So why don't we learn about these matriarchal kingdoms, about the daughters who inherited land, about the grandmothers who oversaw ancestral rites? Perhaps because when centralized state systems modeled on Western governance took hold, especially under colonial rule and the influence of patriarchal religions, these traditions were deemed backward, disorderly, or incompatible with modern administration. And so they were gradually replaced with patriarchal frameworks more aligned with bureaucratic control. What remains are fragments, in ceremonies, in lullabies, in old folk tales, and in fading memory. Leaving Southeast Asia behind, we now cross the Pacific Ocean and arrive in the Americas, a land where goddesses were once carved in stone and where matrilineal traditions were deeply woven into the spiritual life of the Maya, Inca, and ancient Andean communities. Before all of it was buried beneath the sword and the sermons of a conquest disguised as civilization, there was once a world where women were the root of life, the soul of the land, and the keepers of communal memory. Before the Spanish arrived with muskets and the cross, before indigenous pyramids were burned and goddess statues smashed in a religious frenzy, there was another world, one where the maternal line was sacred, and women were not only caretakers of families, but guardians of an entire people's spirit, a world silenced and never fully retold. Today, when people recall the great civilizations of Central and South America, the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, they often think of war gods, sun kings, and towering monuments built to glorify emperors. But if we look more closely at the stones, the faded glyphs etched into ancient walls, something else begins to emerge. The quiet presence of goddesses, of matriarchal echoes, not boldly proclaimed, but never fully erased. In ancient Maya culture, Ixchel was one of the most revered goddesses. She ruled over the moon, childbirth, medicine, and weaving, all central to Maya life. On Cozumel Island, once a sacred pilgrimage site for Maya women, evidence reveals that women traveled from far and wide to pray to her for fertility, health, and safe childbirth. These journeys, often hundreds of kilometers by sea, show just how vital her presence was, spiritually and socially. Further south, in the vast Inca realm that stretched across the Andes, we often hear of the Sapa Inca, the male emperor said to be the son of the sun god Inti. But within Inca mythology there is also Mamaquilla, the moon goddess, wife of Inti, protector of women, timekeeper of the lunar calendar. Though male gods were etched into stone with grandeur, Mamaquilla held the spiritual balance, especially in rituals tied to agriculture, fertility, and domestic life. More significantly, in pre-Inca cultures like the Chachapoya and Moche, archaeological evidence shows that women were not only respected but possibly ruled. Some of the most luxurious tombs discovered in the Andes belong to women. One remarkable example is the tomb of the Señora de Cao in Peru, a woman buried with weapons, golden jewelry, and rare emblems of authority. Her skull bore intricate tattoos, and she was laid to rest with ceremonial rites typically reserved for rulers. This challenges the long-standing assumption that only men held power in ancient American societies. Beyond archaeology, oral traditions among indigenous Amazonian and Andean communities preserve the memory of matrilineal clans, where lineage passed through the mother, and women held vital knowledge of agriculture, healing rituals, and marriage arrangements. In some groups, women were, and in some places still are, considered the spiritual axis of the family. Land could not be touched, crops not harvested, nor ceremonies held without the elder woman's consent. However, when European colonizers arrived, bringing with them rigid patriarchal systems, these maternal lines were labeled heretical, superstitious, or even demonic. Temples dedicated to goddesses were destroyed, female spiritual leaders branded as witches, and the matriarchal frameworks were replaced with Roman-style patriarchies aligned with the church. Over the centuries, the goddesses faded from official narratives, but in hidden corners behind closed doors and in banned indigenous ceremonies, their names are still whispered, not through books, but in lullabies, smoke offerings, and the rhythms of sacred drums. And once again we see a familiar pattern. History doesn't deny the existence of female power. It simply refuses to carve it in stone. And then we descend even deeper, into a layer of memory where civilizations have left no standing ruins, only silent clues buried beneath the earth. Here, women were not merely remembered, they were placed at the sacred heart of space itself, as the spiritual axis connecting the past to eternity. These are the matrilineal burial structures, rare and powerful remnants that help us trace a world once shaped by the maternal line before history changed direction. You can rewrite myths, you can raise temples, rename gods, redraw symbols, but one thing is incredibly difficult to distort, where people choose to lay their loved ones to rest. Because that space doesn't just hold a body, it holds memory. It reflects what was once most sacred, what once stood at the center of a society's values. If archaeology is the science of silence, then burial is where silence speaks loudest. For over a century, archaeologists have uncovered thousands of prehistoric graves, from Europe to the Middle East, the Central Asian steppes to the highland forests of Southeast Asia. And a striking pattern has emerged. In many of these societies, women were buried at the center, not just physically, but spiritually and ritually, at the heart of their communities. At Çatalhöyük, long cited as one of the world's earliest matriarchal societies, graves were found beneath the floors of homes, and notably, in many houses it was women who were buried near the hearth or the ceremonial core. These women were interred with elaborate artifacts, bead necklaces, finely crafted tools, and small deity figurines, suggesting that they held significant spiritual authority within the household. But this wasn't unique to Anatolia. At Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to nearly 27,000 years ago, archaeologists found a woman buried alongside two adolescents in a perfectly balanced layout, their bodies dusted with red ochre, symbolizing blood, birth, and rebirth. This site also yielded the world's oldest known ceramic Venus figurine found nearby, as if to remind us that the woman was not just a family member, but the symbolic center of life itself. In the Iberian Peninsula, in Neolithic tholos tombs, circular stone chambers, women were often laid to rest in the deepest part, near what researchers believe was the sacred chamber. Men, by contrast, were buried closer to the outer edges. This arrangement closely mirrors temple layouts, where only the highest figures could enter the innermost sanctum. Was this mere coincidence? In the Balkans, sites like Varna in Bulgaria, famous for its gold-filled graves, revealed that some of the richest burials belonged to women. In several cases, the value and variety of offerings rivaled or surpassed those found with men. Some scholars now argue that these may have been female leaders or high priestesses holding positions equal to, or even greater than, their male counterparts. Yet for decades, such findings were dismissed as anomalies. Women buried with wealth, they must have been wives of powerful men. Women in central positions, perhaps just assistants in ritual. Rarely did scholars ask the deeper question, why were they at the center? Why did they have more offerings? And why does this pattern repeat across such distant geographies? If we're willing to see clearly, burial practices, whether from the Stone Age or the Bronze Age, reflect how societies viewed the individual's role in the collective. And when women are placed at the center, over and over, it reveals a worldview where the mother, the grandmother, wasn't just the bearer of life, but the guardian of the community's soul. Even today, in surviving indigenous cultures like the Toraja people of Indonesia, the memory of such a worldview lingers. Among them, the dead may remain in the home for months, even years, before burial. And the final decision on when and how that burial occurs, it's typically made by the eldest woman in the family. Here, matriarchal memory still lives, not in textbooks but in ritual. Perhaps we don't need ancient texts to prove that women once held power. We only need to listen to the silence of the earth, to what was buried, placed in the center, and held sacred for thousands of years. In museums large and small across the world, you'll often come across strange stone figures, women with full, rounded bodies, large breasts, wide hips, and no clear face. They're usually labeled with a simple name, Venus, as if they were nothing more than ancient symbols of beauty or sexuality. But few stop to ask, why did this image appear dozens of times across vast distances over thousands of years? And more importantly, why has it been so deeply misunderstood? From the Venus of Willendorf in Austria to the Venus of Lesbug in France, from Dolní Věstonice in today's Czech Republic to goddess figurines found across ancient Anatolia, these eerily similar female forms date back tens of thousands of years, and they share striking features: exaggerated female bodies, prominent breasts, full bellies, wide hips, yet almost always lacking facial details or any hint of personal emotion. Early archaeologists, mostly European men in the 19th and 20th centuries, quickly gave these figures a name: Venus, after the Roman goddess of love and beauty. On the surface, maybe this might seem harmless, but the label imposed a modern sexual lens onto something far older and potentially far more sacred, reducing these ancient figures to primitive, erotic symbols rather than seeing them for what they truly might have been. But if we shift the perspective and consider the context, a very different story emerges. First, these figurines were created within hunter-gatherer or early agricultural societies where fertility wasn't a metaphor, it was a matter of survival. A strong, fertile woman wasn't an object of desire. She was the embodiment of life itself, of continuity, of divine presence. Second, the places where these figures have been found are rarely public or recreational spaces. They've been discovered in sacred caves, burial sites, and ritual spaces, not playrooms. This strongly suggests that they were not decorative items, but possibly talismans, ritual objects tied to fertility, agriculture, or spiritual protection. Third, there is no ancient text that ever referred to these figures as Venus. That name, drawn from a patriarchal mythology, was a modern imposition based on assumptions that connected the female body only to desire rather than creation. To call these matriarchal icons Venus is to reverse the historical narrative, subtly replacing reverence with seduction. At Çatalhöyük, once again, we find plump female figurines placed on domestic altars, alongside sacrificial animal bones and traces of ceremony. Here, more serious scholars have begun calling them mother goddesses or great mothers, recognizing that their meaning lies not in their shape, but in where they were placed and how they were honored. In some sites, these female figurines are found next to crescent moons, wells, or seeds, powerful symbols of the lunar cycle and rebirth, long associated with the feminine power of regeneration. These images go far beyond sexuality. They reflect a worldview in which women were the axis of life, not the objects of lust. Why does this matter? Because how we interpret the past shapes how we understand the present. When we view these ancient statues with modern prejudice or dismissiveness, we continue to obscure a chapter of history that looked very different. A time when women were sacred, not secondary. The mislabeling may seem trivial, but over centuries, such framing contributes to erasing the true cultural and spiritual roles women held in early societies. It reduces goddesses to bodies and rituals to objects. If we strip away the filters of modern thinking, if we listen carefully to what these stones are trying to say, we might finally hear the voice of an older world, a world where women were divine not for their beauty, but for their power to bring life, to hold communities together, and to bridge the human with the eternal. In most modern societies, a child is born and automatically inherits their father's last name. It's treated as obvious, a fixed rule of order. But if we travel back thousands of years, peeling away the layers of language and culture, we'll discover a very different story. A world where the maternal line was the most important thread, and language itself preserves the clearest trace of that forgotten order. When people speak of heritage, they often think of wealth, land, or bloodlines. But there is a more subtle form of legacy, a name. A name is not just a personal label. It reflects the very structure of a society and its family relationships. In ancient matriarchal societies, names and family identity were passed down through the mother, a clear signal that women once held the central role in preserving lineage. One vivid example lies in the Hopi language spoken by an indigenous people of North America. In traditional Hopi society, everything belonged to the mother: land, homes, even inheritance rights. The Hopi language reflects this reality. Kinship terms, for example, are structured around the mother. Cousins are defined through the maternal side, not the paternal. Children were raised in their mother's household while the father lived elsewhere, with no authority over names or possessions. Across the ocean in Indonesia, the Minangkabau people, the largest matriarchal society still in existence, continue to pass names down the maternal line. A child takes the mother's clan name, and families are centered around the eldest grandmother. In the Minang language, kinship terms even differentiate status based on maternal ties. A maternal cousin holds higher social standing than a paternal cousin, revealing a hierarchy that honors the mother's line, not the father's. Looking even further back, we find similar systems among ancient African societies like the Akan of Ghana. There, children belong to the mother's clan, and the most sacred inheritances, land, ancestral worship, and spiritual names, were passed down matrilineally. This wasn't just custom, and it was coded into language itself. Words for ancestor, home, and ritual all tie back to the mother as the spiritual root. Even within the grammar and vocabulary of many ancient tongues, traces of matriarchy remain. Expressions like Mother Earth, Mother Nature, or Motherland all personify life-giving forces as female, as nurturers and protectors. Even in modern languages such as German, ancient Greek, or Hindi, concepts tied to life, creation, and the sacred are often grammatically feminine, unconscious remnants of an era when women were revered as the axis of existence. In contrast, as patriarchal societies began to emerge, languages shifted. Maternal lineage faded from the narrative. The father's name became the default. The mother's role in naming and kinship grew blurred, and stories of ancestry increasingly began with a forefather, rarely a foremother. This wasn't accidental, it reflected a systematic reordering of the social structure, a move from balance or maternal leadership to male-dominated power. Yet in the corners of the world where languages still preserve the mother's name, where words for ancestry still lean feminine, these are the last bright fragments, reminders of a time when the maternal line held society together. They're like linguistic seeds offering glimpses into a world that was once radically different. And if we accept that language is more than a tool, that it's a living memory of civilization, then the conclusion becomes clear. The mother line was once the center, not just of bloodlines, but of an entire worldview. But then the journey brings us to a brutal turning point. The moment when matriarchal structures began to collapse. Not because they were weak, but because a new force was rising. The age of warrior societies where power was no longer defined by life, connection, or community, but by the sword. This shift didn't just tip the balance of power, it rewrote history itself. From that point on, everything rooted in the maternal world slowly vanished from the mainstream of collective memory. Throughout our journey so far, we've seen remnants of a world centered around mothers, grandmothers, and female leaders. A world where power was built on nurturing life, not on controlling death. But then something changed, not due to natural causes, but because of the emergence of organized warfare, a radically new power structure, and one that wore a male face. The Great Shift began around the 4th millennium BCE as societies expanded into large-scale agriculture, developed food storage, and forged metal tools. Suddenly wealth could be taken and land could be seized by force. The need to protect and expand those resources gave rise to a new social class, male warriors. At first, weapons were often tied to ritual, not necessarily meant to kill. But as competition for resources intensified, weapons became tools of real violence, and those who wielded them best, typically strong, young men, began to rise as leaders of their communities. In Mesopotamia, sites like Tel Brak, Uruk, and Eridu show clear evidence of this transformation. City walls appear for the first time, along with images of chariots, helmets, and copper weapons. Simultaneously, temples once devoted to goddesses began to shrink or disappear, replaced by temples to male gods of thunder, war, and punishment, deities like Enlil or Marduk. Across Central Asia and the Eastern European steppes, the Kurgan burial sites from around 3500 to 2500 BCE began to feature male skeletons buried with weapons, horses, and military gear. These nomadic tribes didn't just travel, they invaded, conquered, and dominated territory through military power. From here, a structured patriarchal model spread west and south, replacing the more peaceful and egalitarian societies that came before. Archaeologist Maria Gimbutas famously proposed that the early agricultural civilizations of Europe, many of them matriarchal or gender-balanced, were wiped out or absorbed by these warlike patriarchal nomads from the north, ushering in an era of conflict, social hierarchy, and the decline of sacred feminine symbols. We see the evidence of this transition clearly in the graves they left behind. Where once women were buried with jewelry and divine icons, now we find men buried with swords, axes, helmets, and horse remains, a stark reflection of shifting values from nurturers to conquerors. During this same era, language also changed. Words tied to violence, territory, and male authority became dominant in early written texts. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the world's oldest surviving literary works, male heroism is glorified, while goddesses are diminished, even vilified. The official narrative no longer belonged to the goddess, but to kings, warriors, and empires. So why did this model take over? Perhaps the answer lies in efficiency. Violence, when organized, becomes a faster tool for power than caregiving or balance. In a world of brutal competition for resources, those who controlled weapons and military discipline often prevailed. And history remembers the victors, while those who were erased became silent. But silence doesn't mean non-existence. Matriarchal civilizations didn't vanish, they were overwritten, buried, and blurred. And now, as we dig deeper into the earth, layer by layer, another past is beginning to emerge. One where power didn't come from the blade, but from the hands that kept the fire, raised the children, and connected the generations. Following that great upheaval, we can trace its echoes not only in ruins and rituals, but in the very language of symbols and myth, where goddesses, once the source of all creation, were gradually demoted, distorted, and replaced by conquering male gods. Their disappearance was not just metaphorical, when it was a spiritual coup, silent but profound, paving the way for a new model of power that reshaped how humanity understood the world, order, and even itself. Let us begin at the very beginning. In some of the oldest archaeological remains, places like Çatalhöyük or the temples of Malta, the image of the mother goddess is everywhere, full-bodied, powerful, and brimming with life. She didn't need a husband god to complete her. She created everything from within herself, embodying life, death, and rebirth in one sacred form. But as patriarchal societies began to rise, along with warfare and territorial control, something began to shift. Religion, once a reflection of feminine sacredness, was rewritten to legitimize male authority. In ancient Greece, this shift is clear in the mythology of Zeus. Before he became the father of the gods, Greece already had powerful female deities: Gaia, the Earth Mother, Rhea, and most notably Hera, once the sovereign goddess of native worship. Yet in rewritten myths, Hera is recast as Zeus's jealous wife, downgraded from a self-contained creator to a supporting role in her husband's story. The same pattern appears in Norse mythology, with Freya, goddess of love, death, and magic. Before Odin reigned supreme, Freya was believed to receive the souls of fallen warriors, a central figure in the spiritual cosmos. But in later myths, Odin takes command, and Freya's role is quietly reduced, her domain split and diminished. It's a subtle, strategic replacement, not erasure, but subordination. Then came Judaism and Christianity, marking the peak of the patriarchal monotheistic order. Here, Yahweh is the sole almighty God, masculine, singular, and unquestioned. But early traces suggest a more complex beginning. Archaeologists and scholars have found evidence of Asherah, a revered goddess once worshipped alongside Yahweh in the early days of Israelite religion. In inscriptions from Kuntilat Ajrud in southern Israel, one line reads, "Yahweh and his Asherah," a rare, powerful clue that the male god did not always stand alone. Yet over time, Asherah was erased from the scriptures, labeled a pagan deity, her temples torn down. From then on, women in religious texts were confined to roles of mother, sister, or seductress. Never again the divine force she once embodied. This process, we call it by its true name, was a religious reconstruction with political intent. It was not merely a shift in belief, but a complete restructuring of society. If the supreme deity was male, then male dominance on earth became not only natural, it became divine. And if the goddess could be erased or demoted, so too could the power of real women be quietly sidelined. Notably, many scholars point out that turning ancient goddesses into mothers of male gods, like Rhea, Hera, or even Mary in Christianity, was a clever strategy to preserve their presence while simultaneously diminishing their power. They remained sacred, but only as supporting figures, no longer the creative center of the universe. Religion, which once mirrored life's cycles and women's sacred roles within them, had now become a tool to uphold a new social order where swords, thrones and crowns belong to men, in heaven and on earth alike. History is not just what happened, it's what still echoes in the present. When we look at today's world, where power is concentrated in the hands of a few, where women are still fighting for their voices to be heard, and where Mother Earth is being exploited to the brink, we are not merely seeing a present reality, we're witnessing the shadow of a past long buried, the collapse of matriarchal order. For tens of thousands of years, human societies often operated on a symbiotic model, one where women and men held different but balanced roles, where land wasn't owned but shared, where women were not seen as inferior but as vital connectors of life, memory, and lineage. But as warfare, territorial conquest, and private ownership emerged, these matriarchal structures began to fade. Power shifted to those who held weapons, and a new societal model took shape, built on hierarchy, patriarchy, and control. One of the most profound shifts was in how women were perceived. From being central figures in ritual, kinship, and community, women were pushed into dependent roles, as wives, as mothers, as property of men. Their names were no longer passed down. Their lineages lost their inheritance rights. What was once sacred became silent, and with that the destruction of gender balance went hand in hand with the destruction of ecological balance. The patriarchal civilizations that followed were often tied to exhaustive exploitation. Land was no longer a sacred mother, but a resource to be extracted. From deforesting lands for crops, to digging mountains for metal, to building empires upon corpses and quarried stone, humanity began to see nature not as a partner to respect, but as an enemy to subdue and control. This is not speculation. Archaeologists and anthropologists have found that in matriarchal or gender-balanced societies, there were fewer fortifications, fewer warrior burials, and signs of equal nutrition between men and women. In contrast, patriarchal ancient societies often buried men with elaborate grave goods, while female skeletons bore signs of heavy labor, malnutrition, and even physical abuse. And the consequences of that shift are still with us today. We live in a world where women fight to be heard, to be educated, to have sovereignty over their own bodies. A world where the earth is being stripped bare, rivers are poisoned, and the climate spirals out of control. Not because we lack knowledge, but because we've lost reverence for what we once called Mother. It's no coincidence that words like Mother Earth, Mother Nature, or Mother Tongue still survive. They are the last echoes of a worldview that once cherished life through a feminine gaze, gentle, nurturing, and deeply attentive. What matters most is this: matriarchy didn't fail, it was overthrown. And that overthrow didn't just erase the names of powerful women from history, it left deep scars in our power structures, our education systems, and the very psychology of modern society. While much of the world has shifted to a patriarchal model, defined by the father's surname, inheritance through the male line, and a rigid hierarchy dominated by men, there still exist communities like resilient seeds surviving after a great storm that continue to preserve the old order, the order of the motherline. If you've ever thought matriarchy was simply a closed chapter in history, look toward the highlands of Meghalaya in northeast India, where the Khasi people maintain a society in which names, property, and family identity are passed down through women. In Khasi households, it is the youngest daughter who becomes the main heir. She doesn't just inherit land, she takes on the responsibility of caring for aging parents and keeping the family lineage alive. Unlike the rest of India, where caste and patriarchy often define everyday life, the Khasi do not believe in a bride joining the groom's household. In fact, it's the opposite. The husband moves into the wife's home and children take their mother's surname. What's most striking is that the Khasi don't consider this system unusual. To them, it's natural, traditional, and foundational. Traveling farther southeast to West Sumatra, Indonesia, you'll find the Minangkabau, the largest surviving matrilineal society in the world, with over 4 million people. Here, houses and rice fields belong to the women, and family decisions are made primarily by mothers and maternal aunts. The Minangkabau have a well-known proverb, "Anak dipangku kemenakan dibimbing, rumah gadang dijaga." Loosely translated, children are cherished, nephews are guided, and the great house is cared for by women. While men still take part in religious and political affairs, the everyday life and cultural rhythm of the community is centered on women. Further north, in the mountains of Yunnan, China, lives the Mosuo people, a small but remarkable group whose approach to love, marriage, and kinship stands apart from male-dominated traditions. Among the Mosuo, there is no concept of permanent marriage. Instead, women engage in what's known as walking marriages, relationships where a man visits the woman at night and departs by morning. Children born from these unions are raised within the mother's household, and family lineage is traced exclusively through women. What's unique about the Mosuo is that their society isn't about reversing gender roles. It's not a place where women dominate men. Rather, it is symbiotic. Men still hold meaningful roles and are respected, but ownership, inheritance and family authority reside with women. This structure shows us that matriarchy doesn't mean the oppression of men. It is a flexible, cooperative system built on trust in women as the center of social life. Of course, these modern matrilineal societies aren't immune to outside influence. Globalization, mass media, education systems, and national policies still introduce patriarchal norms, but the key point is this: they have preserved their core identity. They continue to pass down the roles of mothers, aunts, and sisters, not merely as symbolic figures, but as the true pillars of their societies. These communities serve as a mirror held up to the dominant flow of human history, reflecting back an alternative path. They prove that it is entirely possible for a society to thrive, organize, and evolve without revolving around control, violence, or inheritance through the male line. No matter how many temples were torn down, how many histories were rewritten, or how many goddesses were reduced to the roles of supporting mother or faithful wife to male gods, the memory of another era has never fully vanished. The age of goddesses, of matrilineal descent, of matriarchal order did not disappear. It merely withdrew into the shadows, into lullabies, harvest rituals, and the whispered legends of folklore. In remote villages where indigenous culture still breathes, stories are still told beneath the moonlight beside the fire. And if we listen closely, we will hear a motif that repeats itself. Curiously, stubbornly, the first creator was a woman. The original deity was female. The keeper of secrets, of life, of the land, of time itself, was always the mother. Take, for instance, the ancient Middle East. Long before the name Yahweh emerged as the singular God, the region once worshipped powerful goddesses: Inanna of Sumer, Ishtar of Babylon, and Astarte of Canaan. These goddesses were more than symbols. They were creators of life, guardians of warriors, embodiments of both love and death. Though erased from sacred texts, their names lived on in folk songs and fertility rituals performed by ordinary people. In Europe, where Christianity spread by building its faith atop older beliefs, the Celtic goddess Brigid was eventually transformed into Saint Brigid, the only female saint venerated widely in folklore. But researchers have found that the rituals celebrating Saint Brigid were, in truth, fertility rites, prayers for good harvest, strikingly similar to Mother Earth traditions from earlier matriarchal times. In East Asia, the Vietnamese legend of U Ko, the woman who gave birth to 100 eggs and is considered the mother of the nation, stands as a vivid reminder of matrilineal origins. Although later retellings often placed Lac Long Quan above her in the mythological hierarchy, the role of the mother as the womb of the people, the bloodline's beginning, has never truly faded. Even in patriarchal Chinese culture, the goddess Nua still appears as the one who molded humans from clay and repaired the sky to save the world. She was not an assistant to the divine order. She was the origin, the supreme creative force, existing long before emperors or heavenly kings. But these matriarchal memories are not limited to mythology. They live on in harvest festivals, in weaving ceremonies, in cradle songs and ancestral prayers. The figures of the Blessing Mother, the goddess of the fields and the matron of crafts, are all part of a living legacy. one passed down not through textbooks but through spoken word. Anthropologists call this deep cultural memory, memories that exist outside the realm of official history, yet persist through practices, emotions, and ritual. These memories do not require historians to survive. They need only storytellers, grandmothers, mothers, folk singers under moonlit altars. And this reminds us of a deeper truth. Matriarchy did not die. It changed form. It does not live in rigid institutions, but flows beneath the cultural soil like an underground spring nourishing ancient forests. And when the time is right, it rises again, in a song, in an old dance, in a strange dream whispered across generations. We cannot change the past, but we can change how we understand it. And in that re-understanding, history opens new paths, not to return to a matriarchal age, but to rediscover the balance that once existed, to re-establish the role of women, not as those who follow, but as the origin of all civilization. When we look deeply into the traces of thousands of years of human history, matriarchal models are no longer a theory. They were a reality. Prosperous societies without war, communities organized around maternal lines, goddesses who held supreme creative power, and families where women were both the economic core and the spiritual foundation. This isn't nostalgic fantasy, it's a part of history that has been hidden. And when that part is erased, the story humanity tells about itself becomes distorted. Women are reduced to the ones behind men, when in truth they stood at the very beginning, at the dawn of social structure, agriculture, art, and spirituality. Why does this matter? Because the way we understand the past directly shapes how we organize the present. If we believe women have never led, never created, never guided, then today's society will continue to reflect those unjust structures. But if we re-examine history more fully, more honestly, then nothing can justify keeping women from the center of today's decisions. In politics, in economics, in culture. What we need is not a return to matriarchy, but a restoration of a truth that was stolen, a truth that shows us symbiosis, not domination, nurturing, not conquest. These two can build civilization. We've seen this in archaeological findings like Çatalhöyük, where women were buried with reverence and sacred offerings in the image of the Earth Mother Goddess spread across Europe and Asia, in the Kazi, Minangkabau and Mosuo communities that still follow matrilineal traditions today, and in indigenous rituals where the memory of the first mother is still whispered across generations. But more profoundly, the ability to give life, to preserve collective memory, and to weave connections, qualities that have always belonged to women, were once the foundation of human society itself. If today's world faces crises of land, environment, war, and division, then perhaps the forgotten matriarchal memory is not just a relic, but a key to healing. That's why the journey to recover women's history is not just about feminism or nostalgia. It's a matter of knowledge justice, of human balance, and of building a sustainable future. Most of us are taught that history moves forward, from primitive to civilized, from chaos to order, from ancient to modern. But what if that's wrong? What if history isn't a straight upward line, but a circle, a cycle of rise and return, where forgotten values begin to re-emerge. Looking back across thousands of years, one thing becomes clear. The world once went through an age of symbiosis, where soft power and the feminine shaped the flow of civilization. Then came the age of conquest, marked by violence, hierarchy, and patriarchy, where power was imposed through swords, religion, and empire. But what's striking is this. In the heart of our modern era, marked by ecological collapse, wars, and spiritual crisis, and the very values once dismissed as soft are returning. Women, at once pushed to the margins of society, are now emerging as leading voices in education, environmental protection, local politics, community work, and even science. But they bring more than presence. They bring a different way of thinking about power, progress, and peace. It's no coincidence that global climate movements like Extinction Rebellion or Fridays for Future are led by young women. It's no coincidence that grassroots education, indigenous healthcare, and land restoration efforts across Africa, Latin America, and Asia are being led not by governments or corporations, but by mothers, women elders, and village matriarchs. In regenerative farming villages, in post-conflict reconciliation work, in slow-living, green-living, and co-living communities, we see traces of matriarchal values returning. Not through theory, but through practice, through nurturing instead of extracting, listening instead of imposing, regenerating instead of consuming. Could this be the inevitable turn of the cycle? A quiet response to millennia of imbalance? When society grows weary of war, inequality, and destruction, the deep cultural memory, long buried in myths, rituals, and indigenous women, begins to rise again like a final instinct for survival. From an archaeological lens, history has always been cyclical. Patriarchal civilizations often rose to power, only to collapse under the weight of their own ambition and division. Yet in the spaces between these collapses, there were always matriarchal interludes, small symbiotic communities quietly keeping life alive. And maybe, just maybe, we are living in one of those moments now. A moment when humanity must look inward to reclaim what was lost: balance, care, and the ability to listen to nature, not through weapons, but through the embrace of the mother. So let this story not end here. Keep learning, keep questioning, keep sharing, and speaking, because every change, even the smallest, begins by looking back and daring to tell history more fully. Not to return to the past, but to understand it rightly. And from that understanding, write the future.